good. So it looks like we're live, guys. So this is our discussion. Hello, everyone that's watching. My name is Marta Berhane, and I wanted to have this roundtable discussion in honor of Finan Berhe. He is a 30-year-old Eritrean-American who was killed by police officers on May 7th of this year in the White Oak suburb of Silver Spring, Maryland. It was a police call at an apartment complex, and there was a situation that happened, and Finan was going through some mental health issues at the time and had a knife, and multiple police were around him, and they shot and killed him, unfortunately. So I thought it was a good idea to have a discussion with Eritreans and Ethiopians within the Denver community that are aligned with the Black Lives Matter movement and wanted to share their perspectives of this situation and just in general how our community intersects with the Black American community. So that being said, I wanted to allow the participants to introduce themselves, starting with Senai and then Matt and Jameel.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Martha, for having me here. Greatly appreciate this opportunity to talk about a really, really hot topic. My name is Senai Gebremichael. I'm from Denver, Colorado. I am an Ethiopian diaspora. I'm currently part of the Tagadu Professionals Network as a communication strategist, and I've also served on the Aurora Immigrant and Refugee Commission Board here in the city, county of Aurora. So I'm looking forward to talking to my brothers and sisters here.
I'm Matthew Mengesha. I am Eritrean-American, and similar. Really excited to talk about how our community can come together to fight for social justice. I'm currently a policy advocate at the Spring Institute, working towards pushing policies for immigrants and refugees.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamel Casahoon. I am Ethiopian American. I am a student at the University of Colorado Boulder, where I study international affairs, sociology, political science, and a minor in Arabic. Hoping to go into law in the future. I've worked on a number of different police reform projects at Boulder, working with our campus police to have community panels to interview new officers that we hire and that we have in our community. I've also worked with the Boulder Police Department and the Boulder County Police Task Force to hire an independent police monitor. And I've also dabbled in different types of police trainings and worked at times closely with law enforcement as far as bridging the gap between the community and their practices.
Thank you guys for your introductions. So I actually wanted to start off the discussion with an article that came out last night. It's an update to the case of Finan, a news conference that was held by the police chief. And there was no charges that were brought onto the police that were involved with the killing of Finan Berhe. And at the news conference, Montgomery County Police Chief Marcus Jones called the findings fair. And when asked about the police response and whether the police officer on scene, Cohen, took enough time to deal with somebody who might have been suffering from mental health, he said that he did not know he was going through a mental health crisis. So I know that there's a term that's been thrown around called suicide by cop. Do any of you kind of can talk about that and how that's relevant to what happened to Finan?
I can talk a bit about that. I've actually watched the body cam footage of the case. Again, a very tragic incident. And the one thing I didn't see, and I'll touch base on training I've done with police officers in regards to de-escalation and trying to train for such a scenario. I didn't see the officer engage with Finan in any way. It was very clear, based on the call and based on what was reported, that he was going through a mental health episode. His neighbors had called saying he was being belligerent, but obviously he was clearly having a breakdown. The officer right approaching on scene, which I've learned when training and reading manuals on this, just through law enforcement, just gun drawn out, didn't engage with him at all, just kept yelling at him to get on the ground, drop the knife, not, even though in a situation like that, what officers would want to do based on my experience and discussions I've had with the other members of law enforcement is to, maybe not approach them with a gun and drawn, and maybe try to engage in dialogue such as, hey, we just got a call on disturbance. Can you please just put the knife down? Can we talk? Try to build some sort of rapport. But this officer didn't do that at all. And it doesn't surprise me because in their eyes, they're saying, it's a man with a knife running towards a police officer. It seems black and white to them. But a lot of the gray area that they don't see is the intersectionality between Fanan's race and just his mental health state. Because of course, him being a black man, and of course him having that, being in that mental episode is just almost considerably a death sentence. And, when I engaged in the training and, to try to prevent what we call suicide by cop which is when someone who has a non-firearm, usually a blunt object or a knife, will run towards a cop and with the hopes to eventually or essentially be killed by them, rather than detained or arrested. And in the training scenario I had done, these were officers I had known for almost 2 years. And when they came all in, one of them came in with their gun out, like it was a fake gun, of course. But again, this is an officer I've known for almost 2 years. I went into shock myself, right? And I know this person. Like I've joked with this person. I've gone to restaurants with this person. And of course I had to play the part as far as trying to create a situation where they can try to de-escalate. But I would be lying if I didn't say, part of my reaction wasn't genuine. I was screaming all types of swear words at these officers. I was very dramatic, but it felt intense to me. So I can't imagine someone like Fanan who's having an episode like that with obviously a police officer who he doesn't know, a police officer who's not trying to engage with him, because at least at some point in my training, they engaged with me. They tried to, one of the officers put their gun away and was talking with me and just asking more personal questions like, I know this is a bad day for you. Like, why is this a bad day for you? I know this is probably not the normal for you. Like, and telling me like, when I approached him with the knife, which is part of the scenario, he's saying like, I'd tell him like, kill me and whatever else. But he was saying, that's not what I want to do. That's not what's going to happen. Like, you're not going to die, but there was nothing like that. So I think suicide by cop is something that occurs consistently, and the lack of training, or at least emphasis of, responding to people who are going through these mental health episodes is something that's a very big problem. And especially when you, again, look at the intersectionality between Fanan's race and his just mental health state. It's something that just plays a larger role into what we're fighting for and just the injustices that we will see in our country and in our community.
It's also interesting that like people know that you can use that as a way of suicide because they know the police are ready to shoot, right? Like there's no suicide by fire department. There's no suicide by all these other different groups. So like it really speaks to the underlying issues of that. Like police are known to kill. So people are like, can even see that as a route because the police do that and they're that violent.
Yeah, and I something that I wanted to touch on that you brought up, Jameel, was that he was in an episode, and that mental health was somewhere in there. So I know Senai and Matt, you both work with or have worked with immigrants and refugees. So do either of you have anything to add about kind of how mental health impacts our community, whether like immigrants or first generation immigrants?
Yeah. Absolutely, Martha. I've been lucky enough to have some type of mental health trainings in real world scenarios, and that happened at the Village Exchange Center, which is over here on Colfax in Havana. And it was actually taught by a police officer. and a former police officer. And he would run through these scenarios that basically told you if somebody was basically having an episode, how you're supposed to react to that. You know, you're number one, you're not supposed to go over to them and yell at them and tell them, stop it, everything is fine, you'll be okay, get it together or whatnot. And also, you don't want to actually give them like a pat on the back saying, hey, it's okay, because they're going through an episode. They are very frightened, you know, their sense is heightened right now. So anything can kind of set them off. And, you know, our background, a lot of us coming from the Horn of Africa, a lot of our families and parents have gone through a flight where they had to cross the Red Sea. They had to go through Libya, you know, they had to go through the Mediterranean. And that puts some type of PSD, that puts some type of trauma in them. And it actually does get passed down to us, you know. Mental health is a big, almost taboo issue in our community, because a lot of us, not only are we afraid to talk about it, we actually really don't know how to deal with it, you know, because here in the States, you know, you're supposed to go to the doctors, right? And they're going to diagnose you. A lot of the times they're going to say you're fine, so go back to work or whatnot. But that's really not going to cut it for us, because a lot of us are going through a lot of issues, especially even right now during the pandemic. People are struggling with depression, anxiety, loneliness, eating disorders. There's so many topics going on. So I would just refer back to your question to practice as much as possible, learning about mental health, the disorders, and taking some courses out there, you know, real world scenarios like, you know, as Jameel talked about what he experienced. That really helps you, because once you're in that scenario, you realize like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is how I'm supposed to react, you know? We want to make sure people feel safe and they feel comfortable, but we have to take time to build that rapport with someone, you know? It's gonna take time. So I'm obviously not a mental health and wellness expert, like at all. You know, I've actually never seen a psychiatrist. I hear it's very recommended, but those are kind of like the steps that you'd want to go in that direction.
Well said. Matt, did you have anything to add? I know that you had a discussion this past week with some recently arrived immigrants, correct, from the Horn.
Yeah, you know, I think that plays a big role in mental health. Is, you know, one, our parents, the majority of them spent most of their lives in a war, or the war was impacting them in some way. So a lot of PTSD there that I think is unaddressed in our community, and then that trauma gets passed down to the kids, right? Because the parents have never addressed it, or our parents haven't addressed it. And then even this new generation of refugees that are coming here, you know, they're literally putting their lives on the line. Folks are crossing over a sea that's taken hundreds of thousands of our people. People are coming all the way across to South America and taking a trip all the way up through Central America. Many of them being robbed, many of them facing, you know, sex trafficking, human trafficking, organ selling, right? Like there's just so much trauma in between the journey between back home and here. And then when they get here, it just becomes focused on building our families and building, you know, like building what we can for our family. And then mental health just gets pushed to the back burner, and it just sits there unaddressed and builds up with us.
I know for me personally, it's been really difficult navigating kind of this like diaspora joint identity of being Eritrean and American in the wake of Black Lives Matter, right? Because at home and conversations with relatives, you know, I have expectations of being this, you know, typical daughter, like the family obligations, right? Of following school and doing well in work. While also hearing and seeing, you know, folks protesting on the streets and almost being like, well, you know, don't distract yourself with what's going on out there. Be safe. We don't want you to get hurt. But it's like, how can you be your authentic self when your home identity is conflicting with your outside identity? Because when I go out in the street, it's not like, you know, like my colleagues or like loose friends or something know me as an Eritrean-American girl. No, they know me as a Black girl like Martha from Aurora, Colorado. So that's been really hard for me, is grappling, you know, those conversations with some family members of like, this issue matters to me too, because at the end of the day, I was born here. I am an American. There's a lot of things happening back home. I sympathize with that. But here in the city that I grew up in is where Elijah McClain was killed, is where the Aurora movie theater movie theater shooting happened. And the certain grace that they treated the Aurora shooter is not the same way that they treat an innocent Black man. So how is that kind of like joint identity affecting you all during this time?
I would say, I think it's something like you said, a conflict that we all come to growing up, right? It's like our parents are telling us, are trying to get us to identify more with our cultural and ethnic roots, rather than to identify simply as Black American. And for me, that was things such as the way I dress, the way I cut my hair, so and everything else. But eventually I started to realize the way I'm being treated by society, the way I'm viewed like society, like you mentioned, Martha, as a Black man, not an Ethiopian American. There's no distinguishment that we need to add. So eventually I became fully abrasive of that. But I would say when all of this went down, I guess the real conflict for me was to try to establish my place within it. And, you know, I would go to these protests, and I was, you know, asked to speak at a few of them in Boulder. But there was times in which, you know, I have my own trauma and seeing what my friends had gone through and them undergoing the criminal justice system. But at the same time, you know, when they say things like 400 years of oppression and 400 years of this, I'm like, well, I'm not really a part of that, right? Like my family had just, and we have our own struggles back home, but my family had just been here. I'm like the first generation. So at times there's these struggles of like, where do I actually belong in this movement, right? Because I can't make claims such as this is my lineage of like oppression and just like, you know, I'm a descendant of slaves from this country like other Black Americans do. But at the same time, I had found that, you know, I guess one thing to mostly emphasize is the things I've seen, the things I know with other members of the Black community are going through, and, you know, just kind of reconcile all of that within those things and those aspects of my identity, and just move forward and support this movement in any way I can. So I guess that's kind of what I've noticed. And I think, especially for the Ethiopian community, in the case of Finan, it's like, you know, where hopefully it's like, it's one of those cases where we're finally seeing like, of course, this can happen to members of our community. It does happen to members of our community. So what's the point in trying to diverge from the, you know, Black community at large if, you know, they're being treated the same way, they're being viewed the same way when one of the members of our communities is having a mental episode. So yeah, that's just kind of where I was at, and especially in regards to thinking of this case.
Yeah, that's well said, Jameel. Thank you for all that you've been doing out here. But back to Martha's question, I think it's interesting to have this dynamic where we are technically African Americans. Most of us were born and raised here, but there has been a clear distinction of basically our background or ancestry, or even first generation being American diasporas. And I shared this with Martha yesterday. Like I was the first one born in America. I've been born and raised here. You know, my family, they had to flee the Horn due to several geopolitical factors at the time, you know, of oppression. So they came here, they had me. I was raised here in a predominantly a white neighborhood, you know, went to a predominantly white school, you know, so it was always a challenge for me to kind of fit in, you know. Nobody could pronounce my name. Nobody could understand where I was from. They had no idea what Ethiopia was about. They only talked about starving people, you know. So there's these labels already on me. But growing up, I found a lot of strength and indulgence in African American culture, history, identity, you know. We can go back to Marcus Garvey, Harriet Tubman. I just really love these individuals for standing up for themselves and for their people. And I gravitated to that even till this day, you know, and I'm really appreciative of it. And the older I've got, you know, I learned more about my Tigrinya speaking ancestry back home, you know, and I've, you know, come to terms that is my true identity, but I'm also like a hybrid, you know, and I've had examples growing up here in the States where individuals they'd make it clear, African Americans would say, oh, so now you're not like us, you know, you don't look like us, you're light or your name's different. And that kind of made me feel some type of way. I thought I was you. I thought we were the same, you know? And so, and then there's both sides, you know, there's other Africans who come to America and they're like, you know, don't be like Black America, you know, don't be like them, don't do this. And when you're younger, you're just like, oh, that's messed up. You don't really get it. But when you get older, you kind of see there's a huge divide and difference, you know, of Black on Black crime, you know, African versus Black. And it's really sad. And with Finan dying, it's so sad, you know, again, I did watch the video. I know I shouldn't have, but it's just so sad. You know, here's another Black man crying out for help, and he knows what's going to happen. You know, even if he didn't have a knife, they probably still would have shot him, you know? So it would have been great if the sergeant at the time called in some type of backup where somebody is equipped to deal with these type of escalations, you know, because I don't agree with just shooting a gun right away. That doesn't help at all. And African American community is tired. They're sad. They're angry. They've had enough, you know. And now, of course, it's going to happen to other East Africans, other Africans in the world, because when we go outside of our homes, we all look alike. We look very similar, you know, different complexions, different skin tones, but we're still Black in America. You know, when you get pulled over and the officer looks at your last name and he can't pronounce it, he's not going to say, oh, you're from Ethiopia. You know, he's going to see you as a Black man. You might not even get a chance for him to look at your ID because things get escalated before that. So I'm just hoping that we can build this bridge between African Americans and African diasporas to understand that we're on the same team. We're out for the same goal. That's justice. We've got a long list of probably millions of names, just like Finan, that continue not to get any justice. And the story you see is, oh, there's a Black man charging at me with a knife, you know? There's got to be more to it than that. So I really hope we can, you know, have this discussion, educate others, especially the Habesha community, and let them know we are them. We are the same. They laid the foundation for us to even be here to begin with, even on a global scale. You know, we yell Black Lives Matter. Other people pick that up and say Palestinian lives matter. And they do. It shouldn't be a hard thing to say, to admit Black Lives Matter. It's like we're screaming for people to love us and treat us equally when it's not working. So I don't know. I'll kick it to back to you, Martha.
Thanks, Sanai. Oh, Matt, I just want to see if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much like similar, you know, like when I was a kid, I remember going to school and people being like, "Oh, you smell like onions," you know, and it's like that different kind of barrier there. But I think really it's incumbent on us as first generation born here or just growing up here, like it's on us to bridge that gap, right? Because we were a generation that like grew up understanding both sides. We grew up in America, but at home we had that culture from back home sort of inscribed into us. And so like, you know, it's important to sort of mend that and thinking about, right, our parents and historically, right, we've been fighting white supremacy, right? Like it's about connecting those two battles. We fought out the Italians in Ethiopia, right? In Eritrea, we had Italian colonizers as well. And so we've been fighting the white supremacist fight. It's just connecting that dot for folks. And it's on us to do that. Because I think, you know, if you look at the BLM movement, it does incorporate Black immigrants, right? And it's talking about Black immigrants very directly in their platform. And so it's bringing our parents along because they've been sort of indoctrinated sometimes by white supremacy to live a certain way, to do a certain thing. This is how it is to be a good American. And, white people, America is seen as a white person's country. So our parents, when they come to America to build a life for us, are going to see like, this is what you're supposed to be, just trying to make it by, not realizing like the fight here that Black Americans are fighting is the same fight you're fighting back home, and we're fighting back home, ultimately.
Yeah, it's funny that you mention white supremacy being a global thing, because I was thinking about that too. And there's a lot of African countries now that are asking for reparations, right? So like the Democratic Republic of Congo is asking for reparations from Belgium from colonizing them way back in the day. And I personally would love to ask for reparations from Italy and the British on behalf of Eritrea. And there was an article that came out, I think in June, in BBC in Milan, Italy, of an Italian man who had an Eritrean sex slave named Desta. And so we've also had slavery on the east side as well, unfortunately. So what do you three think? I know it's like I don't know, it's an interesting issue depending on who you talk to, but what do you three think about the idea of like reparations of recently arrived Africans or first generation Africans, us paying, or how that looks like? Because we're not really in that bunch of African Americans who have had 400 years of oppression in this country, yet we've benefited from the system.
I mean, right. I think there is a portion that is due, right? I'm not saying that it should be equivalent, but just because our families and us may have not experienced the 400 years, we're here facing the systematic oppression right now. And these systems are still impacting us. I'm not saying we need like, the same amount again, but just like understand that we still go through it, right? Whether people want to admit it or not, African immigrants face racism, and they face that. And sometimes it can be worse because our skin tone can be darker, or sometimes our eyes can be a little bit redder, right? And that it tends to intimidate police just as much, if not more. And again, we're facing those. Our schools, our neighborhoods, right? Go look at East Colfax, where they pretty much try to put all immigrants when they first arrive to the United States. What education system over there is of high like quality, right? Both APS and DPS schools there are failing. Look at the safety in the neighborhoods. Look at the drug use. Look at anything you look over there. The East Colfax neighborhood is detrimental towards immigrant communities, but also detrimental towards Black communities too. So I think there is a level of reparations that is due to African communities that are in the US, on top of the fact that they probably were suffering from white supremacy in the homeland where they were anyway. So white people should have to pay for that.
I definitely agree, Matt. You made some really, really good points that I had not even considered. Because, when I think about it, it's like, yeah, it seemed clear cut, right? You come from slavery, obviously you get those, but just like you said, there's larger social structure, institutional structures that repress any Black person or just African or just the African community in general. And whether that's us being poorly equipped to succeed in these schools, while American society at large has this, is disillusioned with this idea of like the American dream, that if you put in the hard work, then, and, whatever those people at the top have earned is because of that. And you can earn whatever you want. But when, the reality is that's not the case. I'm sure, larger people and different themes have said like the American dream is dead, right? It's like, there are those who are equipped and there are those who are not. And for us, it's, been mostly based just on our identity. Even if there are, I've seen Habesha people in our community who whatever are somewhat better off, at least like within being in the right schools, but at the same time, in one form or another, they're still at a disadvantage. So the idea of like reparations, it makes sense to me. And I think mostly just that emphasis of whether that's things such as subsidies or just, bringing more resources to these communities that are much needed, whether that's better education, whether that's increases in social programming for especially young people, and especially young men who are driven to either join gangs or driven to whatever bad influences because of just the neglect and marginalization that American society has perpetuated onto them, just makes the case for forms of reparations. And like Matthew said, like white supremacy has impacted damn near every country in Africa, pretty much every country in Africa. Some people argue Liberia, but I'm like, well, I mean, that's just a colony that was created by the United States anyway. But you know, whether they profited either on our labor to extract resources, they profited on our on black bodies, through via slavery, and not to mention, way back even in ancient times, our people have been enslaved by a number of different groups. It's not just white people, like by Arabs and so on. But anyway, like white supremacy has affected all of us. It's why the Western world and like the Northern Hemisphere is affluent, why they enjoy the luxuries they enjoy. The reality is the foundations of those luxuries is the suffering of our people and our peoples throughout the continent of Africa. So I think I agree with Matt, like reparations in a larger scale across the board are called for.
Yeah, no, that's great, Jameel. Matthew and yourself, Jameel, have hit the nail right on the head. I mean, of course, it's easy to say, yes, we deserve reparations. I mean, you have to look at the bigger picture and the context. This societal structure was built on the backs of slavery. So basically, not only did they steal our resources, our people, our land, and they're still doing it to this very day, it made them the wealthiest in America. We're in the wealthiest country in the world. And it's because of that. That's how it started. It started off the slave trade. And so, of course, they have the money. They have more than enough money, but it's all about if we're able to receive reparations, how is that really going to help us? It can give a lot of African Americans and minorities a chance to boost their credit score, understand financial responsibility. It would set us up for success to buy our own homes, to provide for our own families. A lot of people out here it's very hard to survive on minimum wage, especially when you have a family. We're human beings. So I'm going to agree again, like, this would help us tremendously, but we also have to come together as a team, brothers and sisters, to understand what we would even do with this, to be on the same page. Like I posted on the chat earlier, 40 acres and a mule. That was what it was supposed to be essentially. And you think at the bigger picture globally, the European countries who became rich off us, those that still have our ancient artifacts. It's like, don't get mad when we ask for our reparations. Give us our stuff back. Is that so hard to ask for? I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, well said. Definitely well said. And I believe in reparations 100% for us, whether here or back home. But I also kind of feel indebted to, this country as well, because I know, like, my parents specifically, they came in the 70s and 80s, so they got to have kind of like, how do I say? I also think it's interesting because every immigration story is different, right? So like, if you came to this country with kids versus if you came on a student visa, it allowed for different economic opportunities. So having two college educated parents before I was born, to me, is a privilege within itself. So I always think about, how do I use the privilege that I have, to support myself and also kind of give back too. So me personally, I believe in reparations for back home, but for me, I would be okay with paying reparations for Black Americans in this country, but that's just me. So I also wanted to ask, I know that one thing that, that we've been seeing a lot is like specifically Black men being targeted in the news with George Floyd, Elijah McClain, the list goes on and on. So, you all being Black men, I feel like society puts a heavier price on you as being kind of dangerous, aggressive, much more than the Black woman. And so do you both either have to feel like you have to walk a fine line between being nice and then being assertive, whether in school or at work? Because me personally, I know that I don't want to come off as like the angry Black woman at work. And so I know like our culture, the temperament is normally very kind of conservative and like respectful, but do you ever feel like people have this stereotype about you before you even open your mouth?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty large black male with dreads, so I think it just goes without saying that that's it happens. To me, I use it as an advantage because I think people don't expect much when they see me. They don't expect me to necessarily be as smart as I am or to be as skilled as I am at what I do, just because I'm the way I look. And so for me, I use that. I play on it, and I use it to my advantage, and I take advantage of them being thrown off to do my work, and I try to like turn it into a way where it's beneficial for me because it's been a negative for me for so long, and so I try to turn it around and make it useful for me. But I mean, yeah, no, I'll just leave it at that.
I would definitely say, Matt, I think that's a great comment. I understand what you're saying. I understand where you're coming from because especially going to CU Boulder, which is honestly was a culture shock. I mean, I know it's still Colorado, and at large, Colorado is predominantly white, but I lived in Aurora. I grew up in Aurora, so it was a little more diverse. But going to Boulder was just something else entirely. And a lot of the classes that I'm in, for a lot of students who are in there, I've heard them just make assumptions about other black men, other black classmates I've had, like, oh, he's probably a basketball player, he's probably a football player or something like that. And when I'm in these situations or these upper division courses, when I kind of go off on or react to certain like topics or whatever else, I think I see, sometimes the reactions of my other classmates or colleagues, and almost shocked, like Matthew had mentioned, like just so much that had come through for me. But and I remember there was, especially last week, there was an instance where they were talking about Denver, the city of Denver trying to combat environmental racism. But then community leaders like within the Latinx community and the Black community up in like different parts of Denver where they are disparaged of any greenery and so on. They were saying, we're afraid that this is just another form of like green gentrification, blah, blah, blah. So we started having that discussion. And then one girl made the off comment, like, how can you really stop it? Like, why is it bad that good businesses are coming? And there's no, it's better for like, it's not economically sensible to, have these things and to like try to stop gentrification or whatever. And, this was like pretty much the first time I had talked in this class. And I just, unmuted myself and I said, well, actually, I am not a huge fan of that notion that you just made, that it's not economically sensible. If you're creating policies in which you're trying to say the justification for using these tax dollars is to, inhibit or stop environmental racism, why would you not stop gentrification? Because the people who you're targeting or trying to support are not going to like reap the benefits of that. And I also had explained to this girl, like, there's very human cost to gentrification, such as, sorry, I know it's a huge tangent, but, you're fragmenting communities who are each other's support systems and, leading them, especially if they become displaced, to be further marginalized. And I think that made like a huge reaction throughout the whole class. No one really knew how to react in that scenario, but I do at times find myself consistently code switching, especially in the professional world. Definitely trying to, I don't know, be kind of on par with the white culture that is instilled within a lot of any workplace. And I'm a huge runner, so especially after what happened to Ahmaud Arbery. And I was actually having this discussion just a few days ago with other Black men in the Boulder community for our checkup that we had together on Zoom. And I've become too afraid to even run at night, and that's me saying that as a man. You know, I used to been happy to do that in Aurora pretty consistently. I would run at night. But you know, these grown black men who are like 3 times or twice my size are saying the same thing, right? It's we're afraid that we're gonna approach someone, we're afraid that someone's gonna perceive us as a threat. And yeah, honest to God, I don't do it anymore. And especially after what had happened to Ahmaud Arbery, you know, I brought this up to my other friends and my family, you know, other family members. It's like, there was a point, you know, just based on what he was dressed in, you know, he's wearing his white tee, his longer basketball shorts. I had learned that unfortunate lesson in high school, especially since some of the looks I was receiving when I used to dress up in such a way when I would run. So I started to turn to the shorter running shorts and just looked as stereotypical white boy runner as I possibly could, to try to divert any attention. And when you look at something like, I think, you know, Elijah McClain, and I think to myself, especially when I was reading on his case, just the fact that he was just going to the gas station to get his younger brother a tea. You know, there's a gas station just like, you know, 5 minutes away, like a 5-10 minute walk from my parents' house in Aurora. And I remember being, you know, just always, especially in high school, going out at night alone, like Elijah, just going to stops at the convenience store to get a drink. And I thought to myself, like, what if, you know, that could have been me? You know, it happened in my city, it happened in my town. So I think that largely affected me, but I definitely do see myself walking that line. But you know, there is a sense of power, like Matthew had addressed and like touched on, but at the same time, sad, especially hearing from other black men in Boulder, that to some extent there is this, you know, fear that's instilled with us to exist while being black. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting what Matthew and Jamil talked about. And back to the question, I mean, it still can be equally as bad for our women out here, but for African-American men, as we always hear and see unarmed black men killed, there is something about us that strikes fear in individuals, which is, you know, very strange. I don't know why their first attempt is to call police or to shoot and kill us. It doesn't make any sense at all. Like, why are they so afraid? What are they afraid of? You know, and me as a black man, you know, we have to be so diverse and a hybrid where we walk to a certain environment and we can act whatever way we want just by feeling the room, you know, just to get a feel, almost just to make other people feel comfortable, you know. And for me, you know, growing up, born and raised in Colorado and being in corporate America, most of the time I feel like I can't really be myself, you know. I actually work for a law firm in Denver, you know, and people are pretty conservative for the most part, and that's not a bad thing. It's just, you know, they've made comments where, you know, I actually don't agree with that. You know, I can understand how anybody would think like that. And it just makes me feel like, well, I can't be myself here. You know, it's only when I'm in a scenario with you guys where I can be honest, you know. So it's almost like I'm going around, I'm walking around like a zombie, kind of like hiding my thoughts, knowing what's really going on, you know, being subconscious of what people are thinking of me, how I'm dressing, how I'm talking, you know. And when it comes to police officers, I already know they're poorly trained, you know, so it's terrifying when they come around you, you know. I've had experiences that happened to me when I was much younger as adolescents and growing up in high school. And I had no idea what they were doing was a form of racism, you know, and it sucks. It really does suck. And I don't know exactly how they can get better, because I don't think the problem is us.
I agree, Senai. I don't think the problem is us. And also, like, I also don't think that your environment necessarily makes you non-racist or anything like that. I think you have to be actively anti-racist. So what hits really close to me thinking about this is Elijah McClain, because one of the cops that killed him went to my high school. Jameel went to the same high school as well. He graduated a year ahead of me. And I like to think that our high school is very diverse, right? There's a it of course got more diverse after I left, but in our time period, there was a good amount of Black people that went there. So even if you grew up in Aurora, even if you are around Black people, if you have some Black friends, you can still be racist, you know? And then you take that with you to your job, and you can just kill someone just like that. And Elijah McClain being this really soft-spoken, kind young man who played violin for shelter animals, you know, but like it doesn't matter. Even if he had a knife, even if he was aggressive, even if he was saying don't kill me, screaming that, he still did deserve to die. So no matter if you're the nicest, you know, best dressed but most educated person, you could still be killed by a police officer. And both of them, Jean was an accountant, right, and he was in his apartment eating ice cream, and an off-duty cop you know, said she thought it was her apartment, and she felt that she could just kill him like that. So it's really scary. And Breonna Taylor, you know, Black woman, EMT, serving her country during a pandemic, was killed sleeping. So it's definitely scary times. And first time that I felt I would be safer in Eritrea than here was in 2012, when the movie theater shooting happened, because I actually was in Eritrea during that time of the movie theater shooting. But to be honest, I feel like being on the African continent feels a lot safer to me than being in the United States of America at this time. So that's just my opinion. Was there any other additional things you guys wanted to talk about? After, you know, if you guys have a few words, I'd like to get into the questions if we have any.
I have a question for you, actually, Martha. Just, I mean,
sure.
Everybody in general, but what can people in general, of course, starting with African American males and, you know, Habesha males, what can we do better to support our women of color? You know, what can we do better to help uplift you? Because, you know, sometimes we're just guys and we don't think sometimes advance as y'all, you know, so we might need some help.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. I would just say, like, continue to protect us, you know. I don't know if you have sisters, Matt, but I know Senai and Jameel have sisters. And so I really appreciate having a brother, growing up with my brother and feeling loved and protected by kind of this male figure. So I would say, like, check in with your, you know, friends that are women, friends that are, especially women that are Black women or brown women. And if they don't feel safe, how can you protect them? Whether it's like walking them to their car or, you know, like making sure they're okay. Because I just think like being a Black woman right now is like an intersectional thing, right? Because not only am I Black, but I'm also a woman. And Malcolm X said the most disrespected person in this country is the Black woman. So yeah, I would just say, like, continue to protect us as much as you can.
Of course, we'll do.
So if there's no, I'll wait a few seconds. If there's nothing else, then I'd like to see if we have any questions. Yeah, go ahead, Jameel.
Yeah, okay, to start off introducing my question, for me, especially at least in the Aurora Ethiopian or Denver Ethiopian community or diaspora, I've noticed like a lot of, you know, it's been in one form or another, women kind of leading the charge or supporting or being those role models in our community. For me, it was my oldest sister. And, you know, I was raised by, you know, seeing her go to college, right? That she set the bar for all of us, seeing her be active in our community and being active for Palestinians just throughout. And, you know, that kind of led to my inspiration to be like an activist and so on. So I guess my question for you is, what has been your role or what's been going through your mind? Like, and as a woman leading kind of the Black Lives Matter, you know, being a leader in the Black Lives Matter movement in our community, but also what do you see as the role of just women either in our community and the Black community and leading the charge?
That's a good question too. Well, I guess for me, like I would want to emulate kind of like what was established for me, like by my grandmother and my aunts and that those people, right, and my mom. What kind of values do I want to bring to the forefront to the generation after me in this kind of realm, right? Because I'm not in Asmara, Eritrea, right? I'm not back home. I'm in Aurora, Colorado. So they always were talking about community and coming together, right? And like as I talked about in like our promo video for this event, when somebody in the Habesha community passes away, we have a hazan for them, a funeral. We all come together and we talk about them, we honor them, we cry for them, we pray for them. So I think we should do that for everyone that dies, regardless if they're Eritrean or Ethiopian. So myself and my friend Isabella and Love, we had a vigil for Toyin Salau, which is the Nigerian-American activist who was killed in Florida, who was sexually assaulted and then killed. And, you know, I'm not Nigerian, but I still see her as an African sister. And then we had kind of like this collaboration between Latinos and Blacks, and we had this brown-Black unity photo shoot. And then we had a panel and a march for Vanessa Guillen, who was the Mexican-American military woman who was also sexually assaulted and killed in Fort Hood, Killen, Texas. And so showing kind of like that sisterhood across cultural lines, across racial lines, I think is really important. And then also just like promoting Black love, right? And then like just like embracing our culture. So like embracing just our Blackness and being proud of that, you know, like expecting people to say my last name correctly, right? Or just even like expecting people to respect my hijabi friends as in your sisters, right? So just like making sure that like we're strong, not just in the house, but also out in the world too. So that actually brings me to, I want to ask you a question, Jameel. How has things been feeling for you, like as a check-in, right? And how is it with everything going on as a Muslim man in this country? And you know, I know that you've been to Jordan, and I know you've talked about how even in Jordan you felt like people were so humble and so kind there, and like how to bring that kind of like that love, you know, into like everything going on here too.
Ooh, that's a great question. I love telling this story. So after I left Jordan, I kind of saw the intersectionality of being Black and Muslim, of like those two identities I have come into play, because I went to visit Jerusalem and I was stopped and heavily interrogated by the Israelis because, you know, my first and middle name, which are both Arabic, Jameel, which means beautiful in Arabic, and then Abdul Malik, or Abdu is what it says on my passport, which translates to servant of God. So there was that, but I remember coming home and I landed in New York and I just gone through customs and I asked one of these customs officers for help just finding, you know, just the gate to go to my connecting flight to get back to Colorado. And so yeah, this is New York. And you know, I approached him and he was like, so, you know, he's like, hold on, I'll answer your question. But where are you coming from? Like, and then he started questioning me and I was like, you know, after that interaction, I was just immediately disheartened, right? I come from this place where people are humble and people are just very much like just accepting. And I was just like, well, damn, I haven't been in my country for more than 30 minutes and I'm already being racially profiled, right? So I would say, like, I think there has been more of an emphasis for me for what it's like to be Muslim and just a Black person in our country. I know, like, my sisters especially have gotten the brunt of it. They're Black women who wear the hijab, and that is, I honestly, to be frank, I don't know if it gets worse than that, right? It's like, my sister, even she went to Boulder and she'd gotten that, you know, bunch of different looks. And there's horror stories that they kind of play off that they'll tell me, like, oh, one time they'll tell it like this, just nonchalantly. Oh, one time we were in the subway or we were in the light rail, and, you know, some drunk guy or some white guy came up and was screaming at us that we were terrorists and this and that. And I'm like, you could just tell by how they're telling this story that this is something that's far too consistent. So I would say, just as far as, you know, looking at what's happening now, and I think this year has been very eye-opening, but, you know, obviously, of course, with Black Lives Matter, but also just the realization and that, and I've talked to many people in the Muslim community about this, is a lot of Muslim people are racially profiled. In Boulder, actually, I heard about a case of I think he was an international student, but anyway, a Muslim student who had a gun pulled on him by a cop for literally doing nothing. And this is like in our own town. And for a lot of Muslims, the mindset in their support of Black Lives Matter, whether they're Arab or, you know, Black, or whether they're, you know, even white at times, has been, you know, once we can support this movement, you know, obviously if we support this movement and these people in our society at large sees that they deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, then obviously that's going to get passed down to us, hopefully, right? So that's kind of what I've seen. That's kind of something, I mean, it's been a fight I've been fighting for years and years. I've been, you know, in MSA in high school, I've been, you know, educating different groups of students about Islam, what we're about, our, you know, our true religious values, how we see and respect women, and how we see them as our equals, and so on. But I think now more than ever, especially having my experience back there and, you know, kind of seeing that difference, it's been more emphasized.
I think this summer really challenged me of like how to be an ally really to the Muslim community, because it just seems like the summer of tragedy, honestly, because I'm sure you all have heard about what happened to the Diop family, the Senegalese Muslim family. That house was burnt and five family members, a whole family was killed in Green Valley Ranch, which is a Black neighborhood. And I just remember hearing that and I was weeping, because it's just like, wow, like you just can't get a break, right? You can't get a break. And that was a hate crime. Like there is footage of people in masks that set that house on fire. And it's just like, it's 2020. You would think that we would be beyond things like this. But yeah, so I mean, it's just like, it's hard because you think you have it bad, but then you hear something like that. And it's like, we really need to be there for each other. So I just remember, you know, the day after I heard the news, I went to the house to bring flowers and just to pray in front. And my friend who's Muslim was telling me that they're doing their prayers in front of that house regularly, because I know there was like mosques from the whole state that were coming together for that. And they're still trying to find the people that burnt the house down. But my heart just goes out to that family, because that's like, you know, the worst way to die. Absolutely the worst way to die. So my thoughts and my heart goes with them. So on that note, I guess I'll go into questions. Sorry for leaving us on a depressing note, guys.
It's okay. We still have hope.
Yes, we do. Yes, we have hope. Yes, like figure one is this discussion. So shout out to you all for talking, you know, here. So I have one question from Veronica. Hey, Veronica. So Veronica says, I am Ecuadorian American and I have noticed cultural tensions, white supremacy, and colorism within the Ecuadorian community. As immigrants and transnationals, how can we effectively help our family and friends back home and overseas to see and correct the oppressive effects of colorism and racism? How can we do this in our own local communities in the United States? For example, one of my relatives who is Ecuadorian but has moved to the US calls any Asian person Chinese, and I correct her when I hear her say this, but I have no idea how effective this is. Is there anyone that would like to take that question?
I can try. I can try. What I do, the best that we can do in our position, that we have to educate others. You know, as sad as it sounds, some people just don't know. Some people just don't know the difference. You know, we can't just generalize a certain type of demographics and say everybody's, you know, Asian or this, that, because there are some colorism issues. So I would educate people on, you know, where Korea is, where China is, you know, where Thailand is, you know, and just show them some pictures on what individuals look like, you know, just to give them a sense, you know, because the world is a lot bigger than what you see it as, to be honest, you know. And something like this also happens within our minority community, our African American community, you know. Colorism, you know, it starts during slavery times, you know. I've had individuals say certain things to me that, you know, one day I was talking to a friend, I said, oh, I'm kind of stressed out, life is rough, you know, and they told me, somehow you should be fine, you're light skinned, everything will be okay. And I had no idea what that meant, you know. And then there's other people that tell you their stories, like it's harder for me to be darker, you know. And you have that issue where people want to be lighter or people want to be darker. You got skin bleaching, you know. I said we got to stop putting people in these bubbles. We're all colorful. We're all going to be diverse, you know. None of us are perfect, but we need to educate people on essentially what's right and what's wrong. You know, don't say this, don't do that. This is how you should communicate and approach. I think so. If that even answered the question.
I'll try to take a stab at it too. It's definitely an interesting one. I know Veronica, you'd said like, how do we try to, you know, address this within, you know, our homelands and people there. So I think that, yeah, it's definitely a big question, right? How do we take the different perspectives we're getting from here, the knowledge we have from here, to back home? But I think the easiest way to do that, I believe, would just be to engage with our family and our friends back home, right? If we all do that on a larger scale, like we tell them, you know, just having those conversations, because usually, at least when I hear, you know, when I'm talking with my family from, you know, back home, or when I hear my parents, it's all like just talk of reminiscent talk, just the kind of, I don't want to, it's not superficial. I think it's valuable, it's important, but it's kind of base level, right? You know, they're not getting into those like things that they're learning, like, hey, you know, this is what we've seen, you know, from the experiences I've had back in the States on colorism, and I understand the history and why it plays such a big role. And of course, it definitely makes sense within Latin America and South America, because if you look at the colonial history there, it's like, you know, you have these Spaniards who were kind of the elitist of those societies, and you had the natives, the indigenous peoples who were oppressed. So of course, like the more lighter toned people in those areas are just looked more favorably to, and the darker toned, you know, more deeply rooted in their, you know, in their indigenous identity, you know, suffer the most. So having those conversations of just what you learn here in our country, and, you know, the very tough, like, you know, discussions we're having here is something we need to try to engage people back in our homeland with, right? So it's going to be hard because there's those cultural barriers, right? It's, you know, it's easier said than done, but we have to find a way in which we can kind of make it digestible within those cultural contexts. I think, you know, that's why I was kind of hesitant to try to answer this question, because I know it's like, how do we bridge that, right? As Americans, maybe we're more willing to listen, or at least like have these conversations, but there's so many different cultural contexts that, you know, we can't fully account for and encompass, but it's something that we need to just work at. So you know, for every culture has a different context. I can't claim to know Latin American or South American culture like that, but so yeah, find a way within the context of that culture to make it digestible of a conversation, to raise awareness of the history of why there's this divergence on the basis of colorism, and go from there.
Well, I know that just observation that there is some racism in our community, right, in the Horn. I feel like, first of all, a lot of folks see our people being the most attractive, whether for their own reasons, right? It's not a bad stereotype to have, but also within our own community, there's problematic phrases and kind of identifiers that people say. So I remember when I was back home and it was during the Olympics, and there was somebody was darker skinned. I think they were from Senegal or something like that. That was a short distance runner. And I just remember somebody in the house saying, "Oh, like they're Bardia," and it's just like, what? And that's a word that I personally I don't think that's a very nice word. I think that's kind of a racist word, which means slave, right? In Amharic and Tigrinya. And a lot of times people kind of use that for darker skinned folks. And so checking people, like people that come from back home, that just kind of use that to describe, like, you know, when you're like describing a person, they say that word. I like to check them and say, you know, that's not a nice thing to say. Even like our hair texture, right? Like if you don't have like this typical like wavy hair, your hair is considered like gorchach, which is like really coarse, like kinky, which is not a bad thing, you know, but that's not the idea of beauty. And I know women use Fair and Lovely, which is like a skin bleaching cream. And so, you know, kind of like the skin bleaching cream combined with like a lot of people relax their hair to not have it be so of an afro, but to have it be more kind of like fine, to make us look the kind of stereotypical, you know, horn beauty, I think is like a self-hatred kind of thing that we need to kind of fight against, and kind of just realize that we're Black and it's okay to have like 4C hair or, you know, darker skin, and we're all beautiful regardless, you know. And there's also like not just one idea of beauty. Like a lot of people think of Eritreans and Ethiopians as the Highlanders, which is like the skinny nose and like high cheekbones, big eyes, right? But then you also have people from Gambela, you have people from Kunama, like that have like flatter noses, that are darker, that are like a different body type, but we just don't show that diversity in the Horn, and specifically for our two countries. So I think we need to like decolonize our minds.
Oh yeah, I agree 100%. You know, I mean, where we come from, especially in the Horn, we're so diverse. We look so many different colors of shades. You know, hair is so different. You know, we come from different tribes, and it is unfortunate when you hear somebody, you know, like, oh, you look like Baria, or why you do this, you do that. You know, it's like, oh, you don't want to go there. It cannot make you feel good. You know, and you wonder, like, where are they getting this from? You know, was there an outside factor that told you what is beautiful and what isn't?
I think that's white supremacy, isn't it? Kind of like maybe they heard it, the great grandparent heard it from, I don't know, like the Arab passing through or the Italian passing through, and then that kind of stuck with them. But that's still white supremacy at work to make us hate ourselves.
Exactly. Which we shouldn't, man. We gotta love ourselves. We gotta love each other. That's how it starts, man.
True that. True that. So I don't have much to say. Thank you guys. Is there anyone that wants to like close or anything like that? I just want to say I really appreciate you guys, you know, taking the time to talk on this panel. And I want to give a shout out to everyone that kind of helped share the event and, you know, that helped with the photos. Thank you, Sabra. Thank you. Thank you, Jake, for taking photos. Thank you, Garrett, for doing video. Thank you, Najat Hayat, for doing video with us too. I want to make sure thank you, Agazi, as well. And yeah, everyone, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Martha.
Oh, and thank you, Laura.
Thank you,
Laura,
thank you.
who's on the call and who's doing the live
Laura.
streaming.
Yeah, thank you.
Amplify the Voice has been streaming this for us, so thank you, Amplify the Voice, and thank you, Brother Jeff, for your support too. Sorry, go ahead. You were saying something, Matt. Sorry.
Oh, I think you were just saying thank you.
Yeah, I was just saying thanks.
Okay. Awesome.
But I guess as a closing comment, just, you know, relaying it back to Finan, it's like, you know, I just want to say, you know, what had happened to him is a larger, you know, issue in relation to, one, just the lack of empathy, or just not an emphasis on realizing people going through mental health episodes or just mental illness are not treated well by not only our law enforcement, but of course in his case, especially that, but society at large. So just the need for empathy, the need to have different approaches to address people who are going through, something like that, because what had happened, of course, is a tragedy. Because at the end of the day, if you boil it down, it's someone who just wasn't heard. And whether that's the many dynamics of, just not having that safe place in the Black community or in our community, where it is kind of taboo to talk about mental health, and having his need to potentially have to repress some of that and not fully address it, which, essentially led to the end of his life. And I also want to dedicate this again, and just my condolences go out to his family. And yeah, I think there needs to be a change within our police, of course, of course, in the realm of Black Lives Matter, but I know we're having, our whole country's having that discussion, but in the realm of, how we treat people, how do you address and react to people of color, but also how do you, especially those who are, going through these mental health episodes and just different types of illness, or even if it's not an episode like that, trying to recognize and empathize with the fact that there are larger social pressures on, our BIPOC and just, BIPOC communities that lead them to either A, react in such a way, or B, just be more anxious or be more just overall stressed. So, yeah, that's kind of what I have to say, close this out. And, thank you for having me in discussion, but, yeah, we can do more. And I would definitely want to say, like, our communities, Habesha, Eritrean community, Ethiopian community, we should be more involved. We should be part of this discussion, and we need to recognize for, either whether that's telling our parents this or telling the older generation this, is there's no separation, there's no divergence between our people and the Black community. Yes, we have our own cultural things and our customs and our values, but at the end of the day, American society is always going to see us the same. So, yeah.
Thank you, brother.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, thank you for saying that. I should say that too, that this is all for Finan, and may he rest in peace. And I had a conversation with his sister Sesson in Silver Spring before going through this, because I wanted specifically her blessing before moving forward. So we're thinking about you, Berhe family, and thank you for allowing us to honor Finan and do this event in his honor and have this discussion. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Martha.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Have a good one. Bye.